The polished marble floor was cold against Riccardo Valenti's knees. The click-clack of 100 designer shoes fleeing the grand ballroom had faded, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic stomp of tactical boots and the sharp, professional shouts of federal agents. His custom-tailored tuxedo was ruined, a smear of caviar and champagne staining the silk lapel. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief, his empire of fear and blood collapsing in a single, glittering evening. And standing there, bathed in the flashing red and blue lights, was the waitress. The insignificant, clumsy girl from his restaurant. Anna. She held a tablet in one hand, its screen glowing with the digital ghost of his entire criminal enterprise. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was as cold and final as the steel cuffs now biting into his wrists. Who are you?" Riccardo rasped, the words catching in his throat like gravel. She took a slow step forward, her cheap server's shoes making no sound on the floor. Her gaze was unwavering, an abyss of cold fury that he was only now beginning to comprehend. "I'm the woman you should have tipped," she said, her voice a low, chilling whisper that cut through the chaos. 3 months earlier, the air in La Sorte, Riccardo Valenti's favorite restaurant, was thick with the smell of garlic, expensive cologne, and simmering violence. Riccardo, known to the city's underworld as the Bull, held court at the best table, his laughter a booming, obnoxious cannonade that made other diners flinch. His 2 lieutenants, brutish men with broken noses and watchful eyes, flanked him like gargoyles. Anna moved between the tables with a practiced, unobtrusive grace. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. She refilled water glasses, cleared plates, and ignored the leering stares and crude remarks from Riccardo's table. She was background noise, a part of the furniture, and that was exactly how she wanted it. "Hey, you! Girl!" Riccardo barked, snapping his thick fingers. Anna turned, her expression placid. "Yes, sir?" "More wine, the good stuff, and bring another plate of the calamari. This one's cold." He gestured dismissively at a half-eaten platter. "Right away, sir." As she reached for the plate, Riccardo deliberately extended his hand, a lit cigar held between 2 sausage-like fingers. He tapped it, not into the ashtray, but directly onto the back of her hand as she reached past him. A burning speck of ash sizzled against her skin. Anna's entire body went rigid, a jolt of white-hot pain shooting up her arm. She didn't cry out, she didn't even flinch. She simply retracted her hand, the small red mark a brand of his contempt. One of his lieutenants snickered. "Boss, I think you burned the help." Riccardo grinned, a predator's flash of gold-capped teeth. He watched her, expecting tears, a complaint, anything. He got nothing. Her face remained a blank slate. It annoyed him. He thrived on reactions, on seeing the fear and deference he inspired. "Got nothing to say?" he sneered. "Tough girl, huh?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled, greasy dollar bill, and tossed it onto the floor at her feet. "There, for your trouble. Go buy a bandage. Probably more than your deadbeat father ever gave you." The words hung in the air, a casual, thoughtless cruelty. For the first time, a flicker of something moved behind Anna's eyes. A deep, glacial coldness. He couldn't have known, of course. He couldn't have known that her father, a man who had tried to pull his family out of the very darkness Riccardo now reveled in, had been murdered by men exactly like him. Anna bent down, her movements fluid and deliberate. She picked up the dollar bill. She didn't put it in her pocket. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, walked to the nearby service station, and dropped it directly into the trash bin. Then she turned back to him, her eyes meeting his for a brief, searing second. "I'll get your wine, sir," she said, her voice perfectly even, before turning and walking toward the kitchen, her back straight, her posture radiating a dignity that infuriated him more than any outburst could have. Ricardo watched her go, a frown creasing his brow. For a moment, he felt a strange, unfamiliar prickle of unease. He dismissed it. She was nothing, a nobody. Back in the bustling, clattering heat of the kitchen, Anna leaned against a stainless steel counter, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. She opened her hand and stared at the angry red welt. It wasn't the pain, it was the violation, the utter dismissal of her humanity. She closed her eyes, and the image of her father's face, pale and still, flashed behind them. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a hunt, and the bull had just painted a target on his own back. Later that night, long after the last dish was washed and the restaurant was locked, Anna sat not in a cramped apartment, but in the command center of a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city. The waitress uniform was gone, replaced by a simple black turtleneck and tactical pants. The severe bun was undone, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. This was her real life. This was Isabella Rossi. The screens in front of her displayed architectural blueprints, financial data streams, and encrypted communications. She was the head of the Silenti, the Silent Ones, a ghost organization she had built from the ashes of her father's legitimate businesses. After his assassination, by rivals who wanted his entire empire, she had vanished, presumed dead or in hiding. Instead, she had gone to war. She'd spent years training, learning, and gathering a small, fiercely loyal team. They didn't kill. They dismantled. They were surgeons, not butchers, cutting out the cancer of organized crime by exposing it to the light. Riccardo Valenti was her new project. Her second-in-command, a grizzled ex-intelligence officer named David, walked in with a tablet. "The clone was successful," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We're in. Full access to Lieutenant Moretti's phone." Isabella nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Good." She replayed the security footage from the restaurant, zooming in on the moment she'd accidentally spilled a glass of water on the table. In the chaos of mopping it up with a cloth, her hand had brushed against the lieutenant's phone. It was a move that took less than a second. Concealed within the thick weave of the cleaning cloth was a micro-skimmer, a piece of technology of her own design. While Ricardo was laughing at her clumsiness, she was stealing the keys to his kingdom. "He's arrogant," Isabella said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He surrounds himself with idiots and thugs because it makes him feel smart. That's his weakness." "What's the first move?" David asked. Isabella brought up a live feed from Moretti's phone microphone. The audio was clear. They were in a car, driving away from the restaurant. "The girl was something else, huh?" Moretti was saying. "Didn't even blink." Ricardo's voice, smug and dismissive, filled the command center. "They're all the same. Scum. You push them, they break. She'll be crying into her pillow tonight over a $1 bill. Forget about her. Let's talk about the bakery." Isabella leaned forward, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The bakery." "Old Lady Gable still refusing to sell?" Ricardo asked. "Yeah, boss. Says the place has been in her family for 100 years. Sentimental old fool." A cold dread coiled in Isabella's stomach. Mrs. Gable, her nanny. The warm, flour-dusted woman who had practically raised her after her mother died, who had baked her cookies and told her stories, and been the only source of unconditional love in her cloistered, dangerous childhood. "Sentiment doesn't pay protection," Ricardo grunted. "She's on a prime corner. I want that property. Send the boys tomorrow night. I don't want a negotiation. I want a message. Break the windows. Smash the ovens. Make sure the old bat understands what happens when you say no to Riccardo Valenti. Isabella's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. The burn on her hand throbbed in time with the furious pounding of her heart. This wasn't business anymore. He had just made it personal. He had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The next night, Isabella sat in a darkened car across the street from Gable's Goodies, her heart a block of ice in her chest. She watched as two of Valenti's thugs, crowbars in hand, kicked open the door to the small, charming bakery. The sounds were sickening, the shattering of the front display glass, the crunch of wood, the brutal, metallic clang of crowbars against industrial-grade ovens. It was a symphony of destruction. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her bones ached. Every instinct screamed at her to get out, to intervene, to unleash the lethal skills she had spent years acquiring. But that wasn't the plan. Her war was fought in the shadows, with data and strategy, not fists and fury. To reveal herself now would be to lose everything. So she sat, and she watched, and she let the rage build, hardening into a diamond-sharp point of resolve. When the thugs left, laughing and congratulating each other, she waited a few more minutes before getting out. The smell of sugar and yeast was mixed with the bitter scent of destruction. The place was a wreck. Bags of flour were slashed open, dusting the floor like a fresh snowfall. The glass cases that once held cannolis and cakes were now spiderwebs of broken shards. And in the back, lying amidst the debris, was Mrs. Gable. Isabella rushed to her side, her composure finally cracking. "Mrs. Gable, Elena!" The old woman's eyes fluttered open. She had a nasty cut on her forehead, and her arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Bella," she whispered, her voice weak. "Is that you, my girl?" "I'm here," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion, as she carefully cradled the woman's head. "I'm here. An ambulance is on the way." She had called it silently the moment the thugs had gone inside. They destroyed everything," Elena Gable wept softly. "My mother's mixer, my grandmother's recipe book." Isabella looked at the priceless, handwritten book, its spine broken, its pages trampled and smeared with flour and grime. It was more than a book. It was a legacy Valenti had tried to extinguish with a crowbar. "He will pay for this, Elena," Isabella vowed, her voice a low, venomous promise. "I swear to you on my father's grave, he will lose everything." Later at the hospital, after confirming Mrs. Gable had a broken arm and a concussion, but would recover, Isabella returned to her command center. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for defense was over. It was time to attack. David was waiting for her. "He's gone too far." "He has no idea how far," Isabella replied, her eyes burning with a cold fire. She strode to the main console, her movements precise and deadly. "He wants to send a message? Fine. Let's send one back. Pull up everything we have on the dockside shipment." For the next hour, they worked in a whirlwind of activity. The data from Moretti's phone was a treasure trove. It detailed an upcoming illegal arms deal, Valenti's biggest of the year. He was selling a massive shipment of military-grade weapons to a South American cartel, a deal that would net him 8 figures and solidify his power in the city. "The buyers are paranoid," David noted, pointing to a string of encrypted texts. "They're insisting on a neutral, third-party inspection before the funds are transferred." "And Valenti's biggest rival?" Isabella asked, not looking up from a satellite map of the port. "The Petrovich crew. Serbian. Vicious. Unpredictable. Valenti and their leader, Dragan, hate each other's guts. They've been in a cold war for years." "Perfect." A cruel, thin smile touched Isabella's lips. "Get me a clean burner. We're going to light a fire." 2 nights later, the port of Callisto was shrouded in a damp, salty fog. Under the sickly orange glow of the sodium lamps, Riccardo Valenti watched as his men loaded heavy wooden crates from a warehouse onto a waiting freighter. This deal was everything. It was his masterstroke. His phone buzzed. It was his Port Authority contact, a greasy inspector named O'Malley. "What is it?" Riccardo grunted. "We got a problem, Rick." O'Malley's voice was tight with panic. "I just got an anonymous tip. The Serbians. They know about your meat. They think you're setting them up for a hit, and they're coming in heavy to crash the party." Riccardo's blood ran cold. "What? How?" "I don't know, but the tip was specific. My dock, your shipment, they're on their way." Before Riccardo could respond, another call came in. It was Moretti, stationed as a lookout a quarter-mile away. "Boss, we got incoming. 2 black sedans, no plates. Looks like Petrovic's men." Panic turned to fury. Dragan, that Serbian dog. He was trying to steal his score. "Lock it down!" Riccardo roared into the phone. "Weapons free! Nobody touches my crates!" He had no idea that, 5 miles away, Dragan Petrovic was receiving a similar call from his own lookout. "Boss, it's a setup. Valenti's men are armed to the teeth waiting for us. The anonymous tip was right. He's trying to wipe us out." Isabella Rossi sat in her command center, watching 3 separate drone feeds on her main screen. One was on Valenti's crew. One was on the approaching Serbians. The third was on a very confused group of South American cartel members, waiting on a yacht a mile offshore, watching the chaos unfold. She had sent them an anonymous warning as well, a simple message. "You are walking into a turf war. Your investment is at risk." She took a sip of her tea. "Showtime," she whispered. The port erupted into a maelstrom of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the foggy night as the 2 crews tore into each other with brutal efficiency. Men screamed and fell. Crates splintered, their deadly contents spilling onto the greasy tarmac. A stray bullet hit a fuel drum, and a massive fireball ripped through the warehouse, consuming a third of the shipment instantly. Valenti, crouched behind a shipping container, watched in horror as his 8-figure payday went up in literal flames. His buyers, seeing the explosion from their yacht, immediately pulled anchor and sped out to sea. The deal was dead. His reputation was shattered. He had been made to look like a fool, an amateur who couldn't even secure his own turf. By the time the police arrived, summoned by yet another of Isabella's anonymous tips, both crews had melted back into the night, leaving behind a scene of carnage, millions of dollars in smoldering hardware, and Riccardo Valenti's ruined pride. He didn't know how it had happened. An intelligence leak? A traitor in his ranks? He would spend the next week tearing his organization apart, beating his men, consumed by a paranoia that Isabella had so carefully planted. He lost money, he lost face, and he lost the trust of his people. For Isabella, it was a satisfying appetizer. But she wasn't done. She wanted the main course. She wanted total annihilation. The public humiliation at the docks was a good start, but it wasn't enough to put him away. For that, she needed something concrete, something irrefutable. She needed his ledger. Every major player had one, a record of every bribe, every payoff, every dirty secret that kept the wheels of their machine turning. Valenti was old school. He didn't trust the cloud. He kept a physical copy, a detailed handwritten book of his sins. The intel from Moretti's phone had hinted at its existence, but not its location. "The chaos at the docks made him sloppy," David said, pointing to a highlighted section of a transcript. "He's panicking. He thinks he has a mole. He told Moretti he's moving the package to his accountant for safekeeping." "His accountant," Isabella repeated. "Leo Finch. Clean record, lives in the Ethelred Tower, state-of-the-art security." "He's not just an accountant," David added, pulling up a new file. "Ex-Mossad, specializes in corporate security. The man's apartment is a fortress." "Every fortress has a crack," Isabella said, her eyes gleaming with predatory focus. "Pull up the blueprints. I'm going in." 2 nights later, Isabella stood on the roof of the building adjacent to the Ethelred Tower, 100 stories above the glittering city streets. She was dressed in black tactical gear, a grappling line coiled at her hip. The wind whipped around her, a lonely, howling sound. Her target was Leo Finch's penthouse, 2 floors down. The building's security was formidable. Pressure plates on the roof, infrared sensors on the windows, and a biometric lock on the safe inside. But Isabella had spent the last 48 hours studying the system, finding its flaws. The pressure plates had a 2-second reset delay after the hourly security sweep. The infrared sensors had a blind spot in the upper left corner of the balcony window, just large enough for a person to slip through. "Finch is on his nightly conference call," David's voice crackled in her ear from the comms unit. "He's in his home office. You have a 45-minute window. Go time is in 10 seconds. Isabella took a deep, steadying breath. She watched the second hand on her watch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. She fired the grappling hook. It shot across the chasm, the metallic claw clamping silently onto the balcony railing of Finch's penthouse. She secured the line and, without a moment's hesitation, stepped off the edge of the building. For a few heart-stopping seconds, she was suspended over a 1,000-foot drop, the city a dizzying tapestry of light below. She rappelled down with practiced efficiency, her feet finding perches on the glass and steel of the tower. She landed silently on the balcony, unhooked the line, and moved to the window. Using a suction cup device, she attached a small thermal resonator to the glass. It vibrated at a precise frequency, showing her the invisible web of infrared beams inside. Just as the blueprints had indicated, there was a small gap. It was a tight squeeze, but it was possible. She took out a diamond-tipped glass cutter and went to work. Inside, Leo Finch was pacing his office, yelling into a headset in Hebrew. He had no idea that a ghost was currently slipping through his multi-million-dollar security system just a few rooms away. Isabella moved through the opulent apartment like a shadow. She bypassed a laser grid in the hallway by perfectly timing her movements with its oscillating pattern. She reached the study where the safe was hidden behind a large oil painting. The safe itself was the final boss, a biometric, voice-activated, titanium-reinforced vault. But Isabella wasn't there to crack it. She was there to fool it. From Moretti's phone, she had hours of Valenti's voice, and from Finch's social media, she had high-resolution photos of his hand. Using a specialized 3D printer, she had created a wafer-thin silicone glove that replicated Finch's fingerprints perfectly. For the voice activation, she had her laptop. She pulled the laptop from her pack and patched it into the safe's control panel. David had already hacked the building's network, giving her a back door. She initiated the sequence. "Voice identification required," a synthesized female voice announced. Isabella typed a command. A moment later, Riccardo Valenti's voice, perfectly replicated from a dozen different phone calls, echoed in the silent room. "The bull always collects his due." It was a phrase he used often, his personal mantra. "Voice print verified," the safe announced. "Please place hand on scanner." Isabella pulled on the silicone glove and pressed her hand against the panel. There was a soft whirring sound, and with a heavy, satisfying thud, the massive steel door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of cash and bearer bonds, was a simple, leather-bound ledger. She didn't take it. Taking it would sound the alarm. Instead, she took out a high-resolution camera pen and began methodically photographing every single page. Names of judges, police captains, city council members, dates of payments, details of crimes covered up. It was the Rosetta Stone of Riccardo Valenti's corruption. With the last page photographed, she closed the safe, reset the system, and slipped out of the apartment as silently as she had entered. As she rappelled back up to the neighbouring roof, Leo Finch ended his call and walked into his study to pour himself a scotch, completely unaware that his fortress had been breached and the weapon that would destroy his boss had just been stolen from under his nose. The stage was set for the final act. Valenti, desperate to repair his tattered reputation after the docks fiasco, was hosting the annual For the Children charity gala. It was the city's premier social event, a night where the criminal underworld and the political elite mingled under the guise of philanthropy. The mayor would be there. The chief of police would be there. Everyone who mattered, and everyone on Valenti's payroll, would be in one room. Isabella looked at the guest list on her screen, a cold satisfaction settling deep in her bones. "He's gathering all his skeletons in one closet for me," she murmured. How thoughtful. She wouldn't be attending as Isabella Rossi, the ghost of a fallen dynasty. She would be working the event. David had, through a series of shell corporations, purchased the catering company contracted for the gala months ago, just for this purpose. Isabella would be Anna, the humble, invisible waitress, once again. The hunter, hiding in plain sight. The night of the gala, the Grand Imperial Ballroom, was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of carriages dripped light onto a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Diamonds flashed. Champagne flowed from ice sculptures carved in Valenti's likeness, and the air buzzed with false laughter and whispered deals. Riccardo Valenti was in his element, a gluttonous king surveying his court. He stood near the entrance, his chest puffed out, accepting fawning praise from the very politicians he owned. The disaster at the docks was a distant memory, a problem that had been solved with more violence and more money. Tonight was about power. It was about showing the city that he was not just untouched, but untouchable. He saw Anna weaving through the crowd with a tray of appetizers, and a cruel, dismissive smirk twisted his lips. It amused him that the little insect had crawled back. He gestured for his hulking bodyguard, Rocco. "See that waitress?" he said, his voice a low growl of amusement, loud enough for those around him to hear. "The one with the sour face from my restaurant. She's got a nerve showing her face again. I want you to teach her a lesson about respect." He paused, then added with a sneer, "See the scuff on my shoe? Have her clean it. Right here, on her knees." His sycophants chuckled, their laughter oily and obsequious. Rocco, a mountain of a man whose tuxedo seemed to be straining at every seam, lumbered over to Isabella, blocking her path. "The boss has a job for you," he grunted, pointing a thumb-like finger at Valenti's gleaming Italian leather shoe. Isabella's eyes remained placid, her expression unreadable. She looked from Rocco to Valenti, who watched her with predatory glee, expecting her to refuse, to give him a reason to have her thrown out and humiliated. Instead, she gave a small, polite nod. She placed her tray on a nearby table, knelt down with the quiet dignity of a servant, and used a clean cocktail napkin from her apron to wipe away the minuscule, non-existent smudge. She did not look up at him. She simply did the job and rose to her feet, her movements fluid and economical. Valenti's smile faltered. He had wanted a scene, a moment of public degradation. Instead, her quiet compliance felt like a strange sort of defiance, as if she were so far beneath him that his games couldn't even touch her. It was infuriating. He caught her eye from across the room, lifted his champagne flute in a mocking toast, and deliberately turned his back on her, a final, public dismissal. He felt magnificent, a god among insects, completely unaware that as she had knelt, her hand brushing his ankle, a tiny magnetic disc, a high-fidelity audio transmitter, had been seamlessly transferred from her napkin to the heel of his shoe. Isabella felt the weight of his contempt, and the cold, sharp focus within her intensified into a razor's edge. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod to David, who was disguised as a technician near the main stage, and continued her work, a ghost moving towards the checkmate she had planned for months. Soon, Valenti strode to the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. The applause was thunderous, a wave of feigned adoration. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the gala's benevolent logo, a pair of hands sheltering a small child. "Friends, honored guests," he began, his voice dripping with a thick, false sincerity that turned Isabella's stomach. "It warms my heart to see so many of you here tonight, opening your hearts and your wallets. In a world of shadows, we must be the light. We must be the protectors of the innocent, the guardians of our great city's soul." The crowd, filled with men and women who owed him their careers and feared his wrath, applauded on cue. Isabella, standing near a service entrance, reached into her apron and pressed a small, discreet button on the tablet she carried. On the stage, the logo behind Valenti flickered and vanished. It was replaced by a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of the first page of his ledger, his own spidery handwriting, detailing a bribe to a Port Authority official. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. A wine glass slipped from a hand and shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the sudden, profound silence. Valenti, blinded by the lights and drunk on his own ego, carried on, oblivious. Because a community is only as strong as its foundation of trust and honor. And I promise you, I will always honor my commitments. The image on the screen changed. It was now a page detailing payoffs to Police Chief Miller for suppressing evidence in a murder investigation, complete with dates and case numbers. In the front row, Miller's face went the color of ash. He choked on his wine, dark liquid splashing down the front of his pristine white shirt as he stared at his own damnation. The mayor, seated beside him, began to inch his chair away, his own name visible on the next page in the queue, linked to a zoning variance kickback scheme. Then the audio cut in. Valenti's booming voice was replaced by a recording of his own raw, snarling words, captured from Moretti's phone. The quality was perfect. "Sentiment doesn't pay protection," his voice echoed through the silent, cavernous hall. "Smash the ovens. Make sure the old bat understands what happens when you say no to Riccardo Valenti." The audio was punctuated by his cruel, ugly laugh. The real Valenti finally froze. The absolute silence of the room was a physical blow. He turned, his face contorting in a mask of confusion, then dawning horror as he saw his own secret handwriting, his sins, magnified 20 feet high for the world to see. Panic erupted. The veneer of civilization shattered in an instant. The corrupt officials, their faces illuminated by the evidence of their crimes, scrambled for the exits like rats from a flooding sewer. The flashbulbs of the press, who had been invited for a puff piece, now exploded in a non-stop, blinding frenzy, capturing the collapse of an empire in real time. And then, the wail of sirens, growing from a distant cry to an overwhelming, unavoidable scream. The ballroom doors burst open. A phalanx of FBI agents in full tactical gear swarmed in. "FBI, nobody move!" Valenti, cornered and frantic, his mind snapping, scanned the chaos for a way out. His wild eyes landed on the one calm point in the storm. Anna, the waitress, standing by a service entrance, holding her tablet, watching him. It all clicked in his shattered mind. The burn, the dollar, the docks, the impossible, catastrophic bad luck. It was her. It was all her. With a guttural roar of pure animal rage, he launched himself off the stage. He shoved a fleeing councilman aside and seized her, yanking her in front of him like a shield. The cold, hard steel of a pistol he always carried appeared in his hand, pressed brutally against her temple. "Stay back!" he shrieked, his voice a ragged tear in the fabric of the room. "I've got a hostage. We walk out of here, or this nobody dies. You hear me?" The agents froze, their weapons trained on him. The world held its breath. But Isabella didn't struggle. She didn't plead. She simply looked at him, her eyes holding his, reflecting his own terrified face back at him. There was no fear in them, only a chilling, final pity. "You really don't see it, do you, Ricardo?" she said, her voice impossibly calm. "Shut up!" he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "Who are you? Who sent you?" "Petrovich." "No one sent me," she replied, her voice cutting through his panic like glass. "You invited me. The moment you put that cigar on my hand, you sealed this room. The moment you threw that dollar on the floor, you signed your own arrest warrant." "What are you talking about? You're nothing," he snarled, his grip tightening, the gun shaking in his hand. "You thought I spilled water on Moretti by accident. I was cloning his phone. You laughed at my clumsiness while I stole your entire digital life," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "You thought your secrets were safe in a fortress? I was in Leo Finch's apartment 2 nights ago. He has excellent taste in scotch, by the way. And tonight, when you made me kneel to clean your shoe, that was your final mistake. You wanted to humiliate me, but all you did was give me the perfect opportunity to plant a transmitter. Every word you've whispered to the mayor, every threat you made to the chief of police in the corner over there, it's all been recorded. The FBI has been listening to a live broadcast for the past hour." Valenti's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief warring with his terror. "Liar! Finch is loyal. His security is perfect." Isabella smiled, a cold, sharp thing that held no warmth. "His security was almost perfect. But I left him a message. After I photographed your little book, I left something on his desk, a calling card." She paused, letting the words sink in. "A single, scorched dollar bill. He's a survivor, Ricardo. He knew you'd kill him for the security breach. So he called my friends at the bureau and made a deal. He gave them the original ledger in exchange for witness protection. The betrayal you fear most, it already happened. You are completely, utterly alone." His face went slack with shock. Finch, his rock, his ghost. The final foundation of his world crumbled to dust. Before he could process the ultimate betrayal, she moved. It wasn't a struggle. It was a disassembly. In a single fluid motion, she slammed the back of her head into his face. Cartilage crunched. Blood erupted from his nose. As he staggered, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second, she dropped, spinning on one heel. Her hand shot out, not to block, but to seize his wrist, twisting it with an expert's knowledge of anatomy. The snap of bone was sickeningly loud in the silent room. The gun clattered uselessly to the marble. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs in a pained, pathetic wheeze, and followed it with a sweeping leg kick that took his feet out from under him. Ricardo the Bull Valenti, the man who terrified a city, hit the floor like a sack of garbage. The agents swarmed, cuffing his hands behind his back, dragging the broken, sobbing man to his feet. As they hauled him away, a path cleared through the remaining onlookers, and he saw them. Standing near the back of the room, by the ruined buffet tables, was a small crowd of silent witnesses. The butcher he'd extorted, the shopkeeper whose store he'd burned, and at the very front of them, her arm in a sling but her eyes clear and strong, was Eleanor Gable. She held a small, simple plate, and on it was a single, perfect cannoli, a testament to what he had failed to destroy. They just watched him, their quiet dignity a far more profound condemnation than any shout or jeer could ever be. They were the nobodies, and they had inherited his world. His gaze, wild with pain and humiliation, finally fell back on Isabella. She was calmly straightening her waitress uniform, the mask of Anna gone forever. In its place was the face of a woman who had walked through hell and brought the devil back in chains. "Who? What are you?" he rasped again, the question now a desperate plea for understanding as they pushed him toward the doors. She walked over to him. The agents paused, letting her have the final word. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper meant only for him, a final twist of the knife. "You asked about my father. You said he was a deadbeat who never gave me anything." She looked around the magnificent, ruined ballroom, at the marble and the crystal. "My father was Antonio Rossi, and you're standing in the ballroom he designed, at a charity he founded, right before men like you put him in the ground. You're bleeding on his floor." Recognition and a final, soul-crushing despair dawned in Valenti's eyes. He hadn't just picked on a waitress. He had danced on the grave of a titan and been dragged to hell by his ghost. "I'm not a bad tip, Ricardo," she finished, her voice as cold and hard as the grave. "I'm the bill, and your debt is paid in full." She turned and walked away, not looking back as they dragged him out into the flashing lights and the end of his life. The hunt was over. She found Eleanor in the crowd, and the old woman's free hand reached out to clasp hers. Justice, like one of Eleanor's recipes, had required patience, precision, and a fire hot enough to burn away the rot. And tonight, it had been served.